Thank you for saving me from that dragon's pocket, dear.
It wasn't his pocket, it was his...
Shh! Can you hear something?
What now? You're always dragging me out in the rain.
First it was giants. It could be a dragon this week.
Don't be stupid, Bernhard.
Welcome to Miniature Realms, my name's Stuart. In this video I set myself the challenge of speed painting this classic Chaos Dragon in under 3 hours. Let's find out whether I managed it.
Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Baron of Dice, premium wargaming dice. Over 500 styles, over 4,000 customer reviews. Welcome to the best dice on the planet. As part of the news leading up to the release of Warriors of Chaos for Warhammer the Old World, we have learned that Galrauch or Galrauch, depending on how you'd like to pronounce it, is returning as one of the 2 special characters in the Arcane Journal, and with him will be the return of his miniature in metal. Rather than the fine material that they also used to do it in, which will be interesting. I think the original miniature came out in 2002. I'm not sure on the sculptor. My brief Google didn't find the answer. There's a good chance it was Trish. She did a lot of the monsters and things. And I know it was at least made to order in 2018, and it's been available in Fightcast, as previously alluded to as well. But it's great to see it lined up there with the Chaos Army for the official pictures for Warhammer the Old World. Really, really cool. It stands out very, very nicely. And in that army picture holds up pretty well. Now, as with so many other miniatures recently I've shown on the channel, I was given one by my next door neighbour Jeff, who runs the KV Forged YouTube channel. Please go and check it out, along with a few other things. Now, it leads a little bit of TLC, definitely. I think there's a couple of spikes missing, but it definitely was retrievable. It is a metal version. They're going to be a little bit fragile unless you pin them, and especially if you're using on the gaming table, but I won't really cover that in this video. Those of you who go on and buy him when he's re-released, you'll have that to deal with it yourselves. So as you can see, he's all assembled and primed black, and I'm going to be starting with some model air from Vallejo through the airbrush to give him a pretty good overall covering. Zenithal style, I want to leave plenty of the dark in the shadows, in the undercuts, in the detail. So I'm not just spraying on the same way as you could do with a rattle can. I do want to make use of that shadow, but I'm starting thin here, almost making it look very grey, and I'll go back and reinforce where the light hits most just to really kind of make it pop a little bit more. But while I'm doing that, I thought I'd explain a little bit more about why I'm making this video the way I am. So I was given this miniature, and it is cool. It's a lovely bit of Warhammer history, but it's obviously nothing like the new plastic dragons that you get from Games Workshop. And it's a miniature that's showing its age, and I really like it. I really like parts of it, but I wasn't super excited about how long it was going to take to pick out all the little bits of detail. It's just not the kind of paint job that's super, super easy. But I really wanted to paint it as well, so I set myself a bit of a challenge that what can I do in under 3 hours for this miniature? How many corners could I cut? I don't always do videos like this. It's normally what I would paint to for a really good striking army standard, and I may well achieve that, and that was the hope with this. But I'm also going to be cutting lots and lots of corners, and I really want to cut down the amount of detail brushwork I do. I want to use lots and lots of airbrushing, lots of dry brushing, lots of glazes and effects and things to really cut that time down. Now the 3 hour challenge is painting it from the point I picked up my airbrush here, not the stripping it in a paint stripper and my toothbrush and all the other bits that went together, the swearing while I glued it together and pinned on the wings. So none of that was counted. So the 3 hours started when I turned on my airbrush and put the white paint in the cup. But I think I can do something that looks pretty cool. These miniatures, this sort of style of sculpt, I think they're a lot harder to paint in a really high-end paint job than a lot of the newer miniatures are, and that's another reason why I'm doing this. So let's see how we do. Now I'm happy with that pre-painted miniature, it's time to start putting down some effectively heavy glazes through the airbrush. This is Crusader Skin through Army Painter Speed Paint. It's actually one of the older ranges from their 1.0 range, the old formulation that could reactivate a little bit. But I'm going to be doing some varnishing on this anyway, it being a metal miniature, so that won't matter too much. And I'm just going in and sticking a little bit of base colour down where there are fleshy areas. So you've got these kind of snakes or tendrils coming out of the skin. Just sort of I want them to look a bit lighter. So at this stage, I went in and put a little bit of a thin layer down on those. Now I'd end up covering most of this, probably could have saved myself some time, but I've not planned this through. I wanted this to be quite an organic paint job. Put some music on, and I really was just listening to some music, listening to audiobooks, and just whacking away with my airbrush really, and seeing what I could do in a short space of time. Really looking at that time and trying to make it quick. This is Cardinal Purple from Vallejo Express Colour range, and again, similar thing through the airbrush. I've thinned all of these just slightly, just a touch of water, maybe 20% water in them, just to make them flow nicely. Sometimes a little bit of flow improver, but they tend to go through the airbrush quite well. Again, I'm just whacking it on the miniature here, really, in places, in patches. I'm using the studio paint job as a bit of a guide. It's a special character. I want him to be recognisable, but I'm also not trying to copy the paint scheme exactly. Again, that would possibly take a lot longer, and I'm trying to just do an interpretation of it with a bit of influence and inspiration from that original paint job. Sticking with the Express colour, this is Velvet Red, so much brighter, more vibrant red colour. Again, trying to leave the previous two colours that I've already used showing, so I've got this kind of blend between the different colours growing all over the miniature. The red will be the predominant colour in the end. And I know I can come back and adjust this. This first layer with the airbrush is very much sketching in those colours, and I'm going to come back and do some dry brushing in a bit and do some thinner glazes afterwards just to try and pick it all out. So I'm just sketching in the main colours at this stage. This is Murder Scene from the Army Painter Speed Paint range. This is a 2.0 range, so the non-reactivating range. I just really love this colour. It's a kind of more of a bluish tones to it, so it's a really nice transition to the blue that I'm going to be using on the hands or the feet of the dragon. I think that will blend in quite nicely between the two, and it just mixes really nicely in with the purples and reds that I've already got on there. So again, patches, making sure I leave some of the previous colours showing, blending between the different colours and building up this kind of multiple changes. And it makes sense. This is a dragon that's been infected by Tzeentch, so the blues and the changing colours and things are exactly what we want. And then contrast, and this is a Sermon Blue. It's a really vibrant blue, but also quite bright and light as well at times, especially if you've got a strong underpaint. It goes over a lighter colour. And again, I'm just using the airbrush to sketch in those colours. If you look at the studio paint job, it's towards the extremities, to the front of the heads, the nose, on the hands and things. I'm just blending that in with the previous colours. I'm using a little bit on the wings as well, though they're darker on the studio paint job. I want to blend that blue into the black that I'm going to add afterwards. And again, I think it looks pretty cool already. It's definitely giving me the idea and replicating that colour scheme that's in the studio paint job. So it looks like Galrauch or Galrauch or whatever you want to call it. Answers on a postcard, please. But I think it's working so far. So at this stage, I was only about 15 minutes in. This is how quickly this took. And I was happy with the way it's going. This is Black Lotus from Vallejo Express Colour. It's quite a bluey toned and light black. It's very, very good for sort of glazing and things, not particularly strong when it comes to being a black, so to speak. So while it is black, you can see that going on there. It works very well if you're adding it to another colour, or you want a kind of a bluish effect. If you want it to be a solid black, it doesn't quite do the job. But it's perfect for this. It's just darkening inside those wings, still allowing that blue to show through. I'm just slowly starting to tint it towards black, which is exactly what I was after here. And then contrast Black Legion, which gives me that stronger black here, much more matte. I've got brownish undertones to it, and then focusing towards the edge of the wings mostly, darkening it again, so you got that nice transition from the murder scene, the blues, the Sermon Blue, and then the last black from Express Colour. Now this is Sanguine Scarlet from Two Thin Coats, the first non-glazed kind of paint. And I don't use an awful lot of it on the miniature at all. I just wanted to reinforce the red a little bit. It dulled a little bit too much. I'm just going back in the centers of the redder areas and just bringing that color up a little bit, making it a little bit more vibrant. And then using Demon Red from that same paint range just to go back and pop that even further, just adding little highlights to that red. And I think it's made it a little bit bolder. Using Leviathan Blue to do a very, very similar thing with the blue areas, just giving it a little bit of a pop in terms of a highlight right at the end. So just on the edge of the tail there, across the knuckles of the hands, onto the ends of the nose as well, just to make them pop a little bit more, stand out a little bit more, and give that brighter contrast between the darker areas. Then it was time to do some dry brushing. So this is model color white grey. I love this paint. It's really, really versatile, thins very, very nicely, but nice and quite thick when you first put it on the palette, and good for dry brushing as well. Very little on the brush. All the standard techniques of the modern dry brushing era, so a little bit of a damp sponge to reactivate it when I need it, to try stop it from getting too dry on the brush as well. I really am just trying to work with the detail here and not obliterate all that colour work we've just done. And this is a kind of an alternative to doing some highlights with a standard brush. There's so much detail on this miniature that it will pick it up. Almost too much detail in some ways. It's very hard to find an area where you wouldn't just spend days and days individually highlighting each scale, and that is not what I'm doing in a 3-hour paint job. So I'm trying to pick that up again, only to then glaze them back in a little while with similar colours again. So circular motions, just trying to pick out that detail to stop it being completely lost with all of these glazes that I'm adding. See, Rob at The Honest Wargamer made the slap chop phrase quite famous, and doing this quite often over a zenithal highlight, which is what I do, or just over a plain black miniature. But you can also work like this when you've already got colours laid down. You can go back and do these dry brush layers and then glaze over the top afterwards. And it works in a similar kind of way really, but because you've already got colours underneath, it just gives you a greater tonal depth. So starting with some Guilliman flesh here, contrast paint, and I'm just going in and picking out those areas that I really have obliterated earlier, the areas of the tendrils and things that I first picked out with that flesh army painter speed paint. There was a little bit of remaining, but I used so much of the other colours that you could have probably skipped that stage until now. But like I said, working organically, you live and learn. So I'm just giving them all a good coat of Guilliman flesh. I want them to look a little bit gross. I know on the studio paint job they were a kind of darker colour, a black kind of colour, but I'm going to be using some Blood for the Blood God on these kind of areas later. This is part of my way of speeding up this paint job, is to slap some flesh on them and basically make them look grim and gory. And then we got a whole host of paints to go back in and glaze over. So similar kind of colours that we did originally for the original glazes for the airbrush stage, but slightly brighter in most cases. The idea is I'm thinning them on the model as I go. So just off camera, I've got a pot of clean water, and after I've applied it on the miniature, I'm wetting my brush again and almost blending it out as I go. I could have set these up on a wet palette, but again, I'm painting in true quick style, pots open, the way you shouldn't do, all drying out there, one to the other, and just sort of wet blending these glazes together. And what that does is it hides that horrible dry brush layer, all the white that you can see, tones that down, but not so much that it hides it completely. So you've got a bit of a highlighted area, so that detail starts to come back to the fore again. I'm not trying to be too formulaic here. I'm trying to dull some of the scales back to black, something I didn't do with the airbrush layer. They were all reds and blues, but I wanted to just dull it a little bit, add a little bit more black into the main body. But again, not worrying too much if some of those scales were red or blue, and just, again, working really organically, having fun on the miniature, trying not to worry too much. The only thing I'm trying to keep the paint off a little bit is all those spikes and things, which I've gone back and added a little bit of white to as part of that dry brush stage, just to brighten them up a little bit. Now at this stage, I think I was just ticking over the first hour mark when I started this glaze stage, and you'll notice that there's base material on the base already. I had to stop for some tea in between, so what I did was whack that basing material down, that's just earth texture, so that it was dry by the time I came back to handle the miniature. I did stop my stopwatch when I went for my tea, but in terms of timing the miniature, yeah, we're about an hour or so, or just over an hour into when I started this glaze stage. What I wasn't going to do was highlight all of these bits individually. You could do it and it would take days and days and days. It's such a complicated miniature in that way. And as much as I'm really fond of this old miniature, I don't like it enough to really want to put that time into it. And it's not really going to be something I game with an awful lot. It's going to be a fun thing to have. It's available to play if I want to. But it's more about owning this cool miniature and exploring this process and seeing what I could do with it. Now for some skeleton horde. I'm just going to use this as the base layer for all of the teeth and all of the horns or spikes. A nice smooth layer all over, allowing it to pull quite a lot down the bottom. I'm doing it in reverse. Sometimes you see horns dark at the top. That would take longer on here, so I'm doing it the opposite way around. I'm making it lighter at the ends, and purely a time-saving device here. Painting the individual lines of those horns in with black or something at the end would just take too long and doesn't fit my brief today. While those were drying, I'm using a little bit of Black Legion here just to paint in on all the rocks on this sort of the moulded in base. It looks like growing out of the ground as well, of faces and things like that. So I've used the main colours of the dragon for that. I think on the student paint job it looks more like it's coming out of the earth. I want to do a bit of a mix between the two, and by using the colours of the dragon it means I've saved more time, which is exactly what I was going to do. Now this is Galrauch Dunes, which is a slightly darker sort of sepia colour, again just reinforcing the base of all of those spikes and teeth with it. And this is contrast wild wood, so I'm using it on the little bit of tree branch or stump that he's climbing over, and then using that same wild wood to reinforce the bottom of those spikes even further, making them really, really dark. So rather than working from dark to light, because I'm trying to save time here, I'm almost darkening areas now, making the tips of those spikes and things look even brighter just by darkening it down the bottom. And it also covers up any mistakes between the little bit of red going over onto the white spike, that kind of thing. This is elven skin from the Tooth and Coats, and this is one of the few times I'm feeling I need to go back and do something a little bit closer to a normal highlight with a brush. I wasn't happy that all the little kind of gross tendrils that are growing out of his body were bright enough. That Gilliman flesh just didn't quite do it enough with all the other colours that are on there. So I'm just going back and giving him a little bit of highlight towards the centre where the light would catch. Not being very, very kind of precise with it here, to be honest with you, because again I'm going to be covering this with some Blood for the Blood God, which will hide a lot of the mistakes. And then Iraqi sand and white grey, because I do need to just tidy up the ends of all these spikes. A little bit out of focus here, my apologies, but Iraqi sand first and then a little bit of the white grey on the end, quite thin, because I don't want to spend ages layering it. So if I've got the paint quite thin, I can feather it out into those darker colours. And then this is Iandan yellow contrast paint. It's quite bright and vibrant. When I was painting in all of those spikes, I also dotted on what looks like a little bit of pussy boils or whatever they have to be all over him. And then I'm just going straight over this with this Iandan yellow, and it just blends in really nicely, looks lighter in the centre, and it looks like he's got grossness all over him. It's just a really simple technique and a really nice way of breaking up the colour on the miniature and dealing with the detail without spending ages and ages on it. This is contrast warp lightning. This is really bright and vibrant and quite versatile, so I'm just painting it into the eyes here, which I've already dotted in with white as well. It settles in the recesses quite nicely, and then what I do with the brush, I just wet it slightly and I just take it over the centre of the eyeball there, and it just cleans off the centre and it makes it a little bit brighter. And a little straightforward vertical dash in black just finishes the eyes. Also added a little bit of gloss varnish over the eyes and over those sort of yellow pustules or whatever they happen to be. It just makes them look a little bit gross. It also protects them as well, because contrast paint can wear off, and if you're not doing lots of other layers on top afterwards, it's needed. And something I didn't show on the video is I did a matte varnish after the initial airbrush stages before I did the dry brush. This is Blood for the Blood God. Whacking it on my wet palette, so I've got a little bit of control at keeping it wet, and I'm just using some contrast medium here. The reason I'm using medium rather than water is I just want to keep its viscosity a little bit to stop it running too much, and I'm just glazing it over all of these fleshy areas, the tendrils there's little bits of open wounds, there's on his guts and things as well, looks like intestine. So you glaze it over the top. Because it's the effect paint and because you've mixed it and diluted it with the contrast medium, still shows the pink through, but it just looks wet and glistening and pretty gross really. But when you're trying to do a quick paint job on a miniature like this, it hides a lot of mistakes, it looks pretty cool, and it just makes it easy. Where it's perhaps most effective are on these kind of open wound areas, and that looks like intestine things showing through. If you have them light enough and fleshy coloured enough underneath, you add this on it, it really does look cool. Colours and tones the tongue, but also goes in between the teeth and things as well, so it looks like he's just taking a bite out of someone. It also works really well in things like cuts and wounds on the wings. It breaks up the darkness of the colour there. Looks like a fresh wound here. Again, just having fun, being a child with blood for the blood god. So I'm using some ready mixed oil wash on the base anyway, but I allow that to go all over the area that he's standing on. Like I mentioned earlier, the area that looks like hands and feet and faces and things growing out of the earth. And so I'm just blending it into the base by allowing that oil wash to blend in between it all, also using it all over that tree stump area as well. Brushing in a little bit of dry pigment into the detail. Blow the excess off, and I won't seal this because it will stay in that detail, but by blending it over into the base and up into the tree stump before I blow the excess off, it just ties that all into the ground. And you know, I have not highlighted that tree stump at all, it's just the contrast paint on it. But once you add this in there along with the oil washes and things, it's surprising how good it looks. Now the awesome Deer Armor FX range from Falea also helps with all this, making things look cool without any real effort or work. This is just their thick mud. It's not a basing texture, it's an effect more, so you dab this on in little splotches and things, and the thicker it is, the wetter it stays looking. I'm just being pretty liberal with it here, whacking it all over, giving nice variation on the base. Adding in some tufts here. These are 2mm ones, winter range I believe, from Warpaint Figures. They're great stuff. I got into using 2mm tufts when I was doing smaller scale things, but I just tend to use them for everything now. They're nice, much more to scale for larger miniatures than you'd believe. If you want really tall grass or something in, great, grab it, but for standard tufts of grass, they seem to work really well. So again, spreading them around the base, not being too worried about where they go, and then afterwards go back to that mud effect and just sort of blend them in, put it over some of the tufts, makes them look like they're more into the ground rather than just stuck on the top. Finish the base off with a nice neat black edge. It's amazing what this stage does for making a miniature look finished and tidy. And then he was done in under 3 hours, comfortably in the end, about 2 hours 40 minutes.
And just before I show you all the proper pictures, you can have a really good look at the finished model. Regular viewers of the channel will be familiar with this little part in my videos. If you've enjoyed the video, please do give it a like, drop a comment below. It really helps the video, helps it be seen by others. If you've not subscribed already to the channel, please consider doing so. If you'd like to support the channel even further, you'd like to see more videos, more stuff like this, then I do have a Patreon as well. There's a link to that in the video description below. It really helps me have the time and the money to keep making videos like this, which I really love doing. I also have a few affiliates as well. There's links for those in that same description, and also the channel sponsor Baron of Dice. Buying dice through that link gives you money off anyway, but also supports the channel further. Anyway, to the pictures.
I won't lie, I was a little bit concerned when I decided to make this video in this way. I don't like cutting corners this far. I tend to cut corners a lot in my videos. I do like to save time. I do like to use underpainting and contrast glazes and things like that as well. But you'll also know that I then go and paint very traditionally afterwards, highlighting multiple layers afterwards. And it was odd not doing that here. And I felt liberating in some ways, and I was happy that I wasn't going to have to spend hours and hours and hours painting little details on this miniature that would have driven me a little bit mad. But I was also a little bit concerned that I would produce something that was way below the standard I was normally happy with, happy to put on the table, happy to take pictures of and put on the internet. And he's not brilliant, you know, he's definitely not my best paint job ever, but because I gave myself the challenge of under 3 hours, and that was the theme of this video really, I've kind of let myself off that a little bit. And for a gaming piece, he looks pretty decent, to be honest with you, and he's fun to have in my cabinet, and I'm glad he's done. And I do fear that unless I did it that way, I wouldn't have got him done at all. I just wouldn't have painted him. He'd have sat in a box for me waiting for the perfect opportunity to spend the time on him. where there'll be things that I'd rather paint, or more pressing things would have definitely jumped ahead of it in the queue. And the Warriors of Chaos are just about to come out, and he's going to be a special character in the Arcane Journal. Let's have some fun, let's get him done, and we've done that. But let me know what you think. Are you going to be using any of those techniques yourself? Do you use those sort of techniques already? They don't work with everything. Might not work for a unit of Empire spearmen or something like that quite the same way. Those certain techniques will always transfer across, so it does lend itself with an organic creature like this, that you can be a little bit loose with your airbrushing and your dry brushing and things, and hide stuff. So it did lend to that. Hopefully I've not spoiled a classic old miniature, but again, let me know what you think.
Well, thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video. It was definitely a little bit of a different one. I had loads of fun doing a relatively quick paint job on quite a big centerpiece model, not something I'd usually do, but I think it was worthwhile in the end. Lots more old world content on the way soon. I'm writing the next lore videos to come out, and we'll have the Warriors of Chaos released soon as well, so that will add yet another faction, 5 in total, that I can work on lore videos throughout the rest of the year before the new ones arrive next year, hopefully nice and early. So do look out for those. Look out for more painting videos, more comment on releases and things. I'm sure I'll do videos like that as well. But thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.
Do you reckon I can outrun him, dear? I don't know, Bernard. Can you fly?